Hello, this is Richie Venton, the Scottish Socialist Party Trade Union Organiser. There's something rotten in the state of Britain. We see all the recent scandals about state corruption, including the infected blood scandal, the post office scandal, where postmistresses and postmasters have been victimised and vilified, and jailed and destroyed their lives and so on. Prior to that, of course, we had the Hillsborough disaster and the Hillsborough cover-up and the disgusting betrayal of the people of Liverpool in particular, not by successive governments, not just Tory but also Labour. There's a general stench of corruption arising from the state. That also is reinforced by the way in which there's corruption and careerism surrounding parliamentarians. MPs who are up to their neck in betting scandals over the timing of the general election based on inside knowledge as advisors to Rishi Sunak and so on. And of course, in general, the way that MPs and politicians are regarded as corrupt by a big section of the population. Now, there are genuine, well-intentioned parliamentary representatives in society, but there's far too many who are in it just for the money. And that's why the Scottish Socialist Party has always had, as part of our principles or inbuilt constitution, that any MP or MSP or public representative should earn no more than the average Scottish worker's wage. It wouldn't solve everything, but it would end that corrupt practice of getting into politics for the money. It would mean that they were more representative of the people that they claim to be representative of. It's something that the Scottish Socialist Party has not just preached but practiced. Our current candidates in Rutherglen and Glasgow East, Bill Bonner and Liam McLaughlin respectively, are of course publicly pledged to remain on the average Scottish worker's wage and to reject the parliamentary salary of £91,346, which is what an MP gets right now. And in the past, when we had 6 members of the Scottish Parliament, they also practiced that policy. And in fact, if they hadn't, they would have been chucked out as part of our fundamental principle or constitution. And why is that important? The fact is that money buys votes. You have to be one of the money bag parties to really get publicity in the current election campaign. Money buys votes in terms of investment in social media, investment in the mass mainstream media, investment in advertising techniques and so on. And of course, there's a more blatant form of corruption. And that is that when big businesses in particular give money to a political party, it's not out of charity, it's out of self-interest. They're calculating that that party will best represent the interests of the profiteers involved. And what we've seen recently in the election is the way in which there's been a switch, quite a decisive one, away from the Tories from many of the big business donors towards the Labour Party of Keir Starmer. And I think that tells you everything about the nature of Labour nowadays as an openly capitalist party, a second Tory party. To illustrate with a couple of examples, we have the fact that in 2024 already, in other words, just in 6 months, the Labour Party has received donations of £15.5 million. And that outstrips the Tories, who've got less than 10 million. Even though they're the traditional party of many centuries of big business. We have examples of individual capitalists who've donated to Labour, like David Sainsbury, who of course is one of those bosses who keep their retail workers, their shop workers on rations when it comes to their wage. But he's just given, in the past week or so, £2.5 million to the Labour Party. That's on top of the £7.5 million that he's given in the last 18 months. And of course, the same David Sainsbury was in Tony Blair's cabinet, totally unelected, but appointed to be part of a cabinet which carried out privatisation of health, carried out and continued the anti-union laws of the Tories, and kept wages at ration levels. Another example of a donor is Gary Lubner, former chief of Autoglass and the chief executive of Belron, who has given the Labour Party £5.9 million since 2020. And he gave £900,000 of that in 1 week of June during the election campaign. Or we get Mike Bloomberg of Bloomberg Trading Facilities, a big international finance investor who gave £150,000 to the Labour Party. And we got the conversion of people like John Caldwell, the billionaire founder, in fact a billionaire twice over, the founder of Phones for You, who has now declared that he's voting Labour after being a donor and supporter and voter for the Tory party for 51 years. And the last example is Jim Ratcliffe, who's busy making the lives of Grangemouth workers miserably uncertain. This autocrat of the fossil fuel industry has now declared that he's supporting Starmer's Labour in the election. Now, by your friends we shall know you, as one phrase goes, or he who pays the piper calls the tune, to give another appropriate proverb to the situation. Because when big business give money to Labour, they're helping to invest in their own future profit margins. They're convinced that Labour will keep big business and in big profit margins. They're convinced that that's a better bet than the Tory party currently, which of course has just been in economic chaos generally. They're declaring, putting their money where their mouth is, that Labour is a new capitalist party, which I believe has been since the days of Tony Blair in particular, roughly 25 years or more. And so why would workers vote for a party of big business like that? And when it comes to the MPs and MSPs and their salaries, the fact that an MP is on £91,346 really does help to shape their consciousness. That's, in round figures, £50 an hour. Now, if they're on £50 an hour, what do they know about the cost of living crisis? What do they know about having to pay the bills and juggle them in order to survive the week? What do they know about the conditions whereby 1.3 million people in Scotland literally cannot afford to live, according to recent research? And that's why the policy of socialist MPs living on an average worker's wage, which is about a third of the wage of an MP actually, that's so important to keep politicians in touch. Because the whole parliamentary system of Westminster is well designed by the capitalist rich. They're no fools when it comes to setting up a system for their own survival. Originally, when Parliament was established, and right up until the days of when Keir Hardie became the first Labour representative in the Westminster Parliament, then there was no wage for MPs. It was stuffed full of landlords and capitalists, industrialists, who wandered into the Parliament for a few hours a day to pursue policies and legislation that looked after their own profit margins, their own class interests. That, incidentally, is why Westminster only meets in the afternoon and evening. They didn't meet in the morning so as to accommodate big businessmen and landlords with their own property interests to carry on their business and then come to the parliamentary business later to have laws that would back up their own enrichment. And of course, it's also why at first it did not have a wage for an MP. It made it the exclusive reserve, the preserve of the rich. And when Keir Hardie was an MP, it's a fact that because he had no wage, then there had to be pithead collections in the mines to prevent him and his family being evicted from their workers' cottage. That's a sharp contrast to the Labour politicians of today, who swan around in fabulous wealth with no contact whatsoever with planet Earth for 99% of us. £50 an hour is a world of difference compared to the minimum wage of £11.44 an hour. And that's why a socialist MP living on a wage of a worker would be in touch with working class people and wouldn't be corrupted in the way that the current politicians are. So vote for a socialist MP on a worker's wage and reject the careers politicians. Reject those who are on a different planet compared to 99% of us.